The feeling I had during that sort of extraordinarily triumphalist session in Parliament, underpinned, of course, by the fact that the Speaker had instructed everybody present that even a single squeak of dissent or disagreement would result in removal from the chamber. That, I think, was the first point at which I found myself thinking, pardon? I mean, the idea that everybody in the Knesset, let alone Israel, is united behind Benjamin Netanyahu is completely at odds with the observable facts. But that was the first inkling you got that we were watching something very carefully choreographed, even though it had been set up at quite short notice. And then we embarked upon this extraordinary round of congratulation and triumphalism without a single mention. And I'm always a little bit impatient with people who say to me, why are you talking about this and not talking about that? Because you can't talk about all of the things all of the time. And, you know, we have to make priorities. We have to take priorities. But it was notable that the mention of the casualties and deaths in Gaza was notable entirely by its absence. And I understand up to a point why that would be. But if you were celebrating a peace, you would arguably acknowledge the existence of two sides in the suffering and indeed two sides in the settlement. But it definitely wasn't that kind of event. It was an extraordinary round of, to my mind, and this is where you may want to correct me, attempts to rewrite history. And it began to look, and a couple of you suggested this to me, and I am going to conclude this introduction, although I don't think it'll be as long as Donald Trump's monologue yesterday, by asking you what you think was going on, what you think happened. And there's two parts to it. There's the Trump speech, and then there's the Knesset activity, including the speeches by Benjamin Netanyahu and the leader of the opposition, to whom it fell to embark upon the perhaps most full-throated attempt at genocide denial. And then there's Trump's speech, which was not at all. The more you listened to it, and this is why I come to you today still with a sense of, not bafflement at least, but without a very neat explanation of what happened, and that could well prove to be because there isn't one. Trump said a lot of things that would not have gone down well in that room. Notably the bit where he told Benjamin Netanyahu that he couldn't just carry on doing kill, 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 which is something of a refutation of everything that had gone before in the Israeli attempts to typify what had actually happened in Gaza. Everybody honest knows it was kill, kill, kill. But Donald Trump actually said it in the Knesset. And then you have one of those extraordinary pendulum swinging moments where you go, what did he just do? So he sort of absorbed the extraordinary sycophancy. But I think underneath the sycophancy was an election campaign launch. And this is the bit that I struggled with. I didn't read it out yesterday. I wanted to check the thinking behind it. A couple of people who have histories of sending me very helpful stuff, one from Israel, one not, both made the point that this was actually an early campaign launch for Netanyahu's latest attempt at self-preservation. I mean, that element of it is, it's domestic politics. It's international politics because of what's been going on in the last few years, and of course because of what the ramifications of anything that happens in the Middle East have for the rest of us. But the reason I didn't read it out yesterday is because I just wanted to be sure of the thinking behind it. But looking at it today, thinking back to what we witnessed yesterday, the idea that it was actually an election campaign launch, the idea in Israel that he might go to the country soon has gathered pace. He's not required to until next year. Likelihood of him being imprisoned by then is growing by the day. The longer the peace sustains, the more that likelihood grows because of the corruption charges that he faces. Corruption charges that Trump then called upon the president of Israel to drop because, hey, who cares about bribery allegations in Trump land? In fact, he expressed a degree of derision that the corruption allegations appeared to involve cigars and champagne. I mean, come on. Donald Trump's just appointed someone who was given a bag with $50,000 in it and was recorded by the FBI admitting so. He hasn't lost his job. So there's another example of the thing about you can't talk about all of the things all of the time, because there's another little bit of me that thinks all we should be talking about at the moment is the creep of the United States into bog standard fascism. Or not even bog standard fascism, but into a very peculiar and new brand of 21st century fascism. And of course, the people who did speak out in the Knesset about genocide and about Trump's unsuitability were pulled out of the meeting with no ceremony or whatsoever. So, what do you think you witnessed? What do you think happened? That quote from Trump in full, by the way, you'll be remembered far more for this than if you'd kept going for 3 or 4 more years of kill, 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 which, I mean, anybody paying proper attention would know that has appeared at many times, at many junctions, to be precisely what Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to do. It's the best way of prolonging his own career and his own survival. But Trump said it out loud. You'll be remembered far more for this than if you'd kept going for 3 or 4 more years of kill, kill, kill. That certainly wouldn't have been something that they were expecting to hear. Similarly, when he called the leader of the opposition a very nice man and told Netanyahu that he can be a little bit nicer now because you're not at war anymore. So, I mean, the other element of that, of course, was the fact that Trump didn't pay any lip service at all to the popular right-wing trope that was doing the rounds yesterday morning, that this was all about him bringing Hamas into line. A position you can only really hold if you completely ignore what the terrorist leaders had signed up to last January and last September. It was the pressure brought to bear on Netanyahu that brought about the peace, which many right-wing commentators in this country and the United States cannot actually accept. The reality is unbearable to them, and yet it is, I think, it's pretty close to observably true. And if there was any doubt about it at all, the fact that he didn't do a lap of honour yesterday about anything really involving the Hamas leadership, but did do a lap of honour involving persuading Benjamin Netanyahu not to kill, kill, kill anymore, was deeply significant. So, I mean, I listened to the sort of round of congratulation and triumphalism with a growing sense of, there was a bit of disgust there because of the 70,000 and counting corpses that have been visited upon the Palestinian people, and that figure is going to climb and climb and climb as they dig dead people, dead babies out of the rubble. There was a little bit of early celebration about the release of the hostages, which is a wonderful thing, whichever way you look at it. But the absolute refusal and failure to acknowledge one of those phenomena just sort of grew, didn't it, in discomfort as this bizarre jamboree continued to unfold. And then, to my own shock and amazement, Donald Trump began to restore a sense of equilibrium, having done the lap of honour and sucked up all the sycophancy and done all the ludicrous stuff. And I know his motivation is probably just because he can see opportunities to make a ton of money in the Middle East. One of these countries has already given him a whopping great jumbo jet. Imagine what else might be on the horizon. No wonder he's laughing at Netanyahu, whose bribery allegations include champagne and cigars. Why aren't you asking for islands? Why aren't you asking for space diamonds? Why aren't you asking for, I don't know, bring me the head of Arturo Ui? That motivation is base. It's going to be self-aggrandizement and self-enrichment. We know that at every single turn. And yet it offered up, bizarrely, it offered up a corrective and an antidote to the triumphalism and celebration that we had previously witnessed. So I think I've given you a fairly accurate recollection of what we witnessed yesterday, just in case you weren't listening. And the reason I said that I don't know that I've ever presented a show like this before is that normally when I tell you that I want you to ring in and explain things to me. I've got a fairly firm grip on what I think about a subject. Sometimes you cleverly prise my fingers off it, and I end up, of course, having what we call a pendulum moment and believing the opposite of what I believed previously. But today doesn't feel like that. It's not one of those conversations, is it? It's not it's very hard to have a really strong opinion about it because everything was so conflicting and so contradictory. So what even question do I ask? Do I say, how do you make sense of it? Because I'm not sure that we can. This is the abiding theme of covering Donald Trump since he first threw his hat into the ring politically. This drive that many of us have to account for and understand things can be self-defeating sometimes. But you can't stop trying. What do you think happened yesterday? What went on yesterday? What was that all about? You may need to have a better grasp of domestic Israeli politics to bring some light to bear on parts of it. You may just have needed to see the clips on the news bulletins to see other parts of it. But what on earth was that all about? In terms of internal and external politics, in terms of domestic and international, in terms of Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, doing what no President of the United States of America was ever likely to do, and essentially throwing an Israeli Prime Minister under the proverbial bus, forcing him into a position he did not want to be in. And that was the point, wasn't it? That's why it was all so confusing. So it was obvious to anybody with their eyes open that Netanyahu had been essentially strong-armed, coerced into this position. The threat to withdraw support for Israel, the only way in which you could persuade this particular administration to adopt this particular position. Just 2 weeks previously, he'd been at the United Nations making it crystal clear that it was never going to happen. We will stand alone like Sparta or Millwall Football Club and deal with the alienation and deal with the animosity of the entire world. And then they started discussing almost immediately how wonderful it was and what a glorious victory they had pulled off. And you've sort of found your head spinning, your brain doing somersaults about how on earth you could be presenting to the world such an obviously and transparently inaccurate version of observable events. And then you began to think, well, maybe I've got everything wrong, and that maybe this is. And then Trump stands up and makes it clear that no, that original version of observable events, while joining in with the victory parade, making it pretty clear that they were essentially trying to turn acquiescence to Trump's will into victory over what? Absolutely extraordinary. I just want you to tell me what you think. So there's not much particular pressure on you today. I don't know that. I mean, I do get paid for yesterday's show. Quite a few of you were worried that I might not actually qualify for my show fee. So please don't worry about that, despite the fact that I did barely nothing, except, again, for the avoidance of doubt, every single decision taken about what we would be taking live and what we would not be taking live and when we'd be crossing and when we'd be interrupting and when we'd be jumping in. It was all taken entirely by me and Elliot, the producer. I felt, I don't know about you, mate, I felt a little bit exposed at times. I thought, what if this goes on for 17 hours? Are we going to have to stay here? Is Sheila going to be given the day off? Are we going to, I mean, that's what I mean by extraordinary and unprecedented. A couple of quasi-anti-Semitic comments coming in, insisting that I'd been ordered to do it or I had no choice. And I mentioned their existence solely to alert you to their absurdity, just as there were accusations of me being anti-Semitic by telling the truth about what has happened in Gaza, something that Benjamin Netanyahu is very fond to do. And, of course, the other thing he did was he kept conflating the Israeli his government's cause with Judaism in general. All those biblical references talking about Jews around the world in the context of the genocide in Gaza, which is a hideous thing to do, to try to sort of make it a question of faith as opposed to a question of support for a policy or a prime minister. And so there's just a few things for you to chew on.